The room was dimly lit, the faint glow from the twin moons of Zalthra filtering through the narrow window. A cool draft whispered against the metallic walls of the shared dormitory, carrying with it the stillness of the late hour. Nathan sat hunched at his desk, staring blankly at the blue-tinted screen of his datapad. The galactic survey he had been working on refused to come together, the pieces of data scattered in his mind like stardust. His tired eyes darted to the clock, 2:17 a.m. too late for coherence, too early to surrender to sleep. He sighed deeply, running a hand through his disheveled hair, frustration bubbling just beneath the surface. His gaze shifted to the other side of the room, where his alien roommate, Zara, lay curled under the weightless thermal blanket that conformed perfectly to her slender frame. Backlit by the faint moonlight, her silhouette was striking, a lithe figure with elongated limbs that spoke of her extraterrestrial elegance. Her soft lavender skin shimmered faintly in the darkness, catching the light in a way that seemed almost magical. Nathan's eyes lingered, drawn to the cascade of iridescent strands that framed her face and fanned out over her pillow. Her hair shifted colors with her mood, a trait he had found endlessly fascinating. Tonight, it glowed faintly violet, a hue he had come to recognize as tranquility. Yet, even in this state of calm, her sharp, angular facial features retained their commanding presence. Her jawline was defined, and her lips parted slightly as she exhaled with rhythmic precision, a steady, soothing sound that filled the silence of the room. Nathan quickly turned back to his screen, shaking his head. "Don't make it weird, Nathan," he scolded himself. "She's your roommate, not some lab specimen," yet the quiet of the night seemed to betray him, amplifying his every thought and action. He shifted uneasily in his chair, his elbow grazing the edge of his mug. The sharp clatter as it hit the floor shattered the stillness, and he froze, a wave of panic rushing through him. Zara stirred. Her glowing silver eyes blinked open, catching Nathan in their unearthly luminescence. The sight never failed to unnerve him, those eyes seemed to pierce through him, unraveling layers he wasn't ready to confront. "Nathan?" Her voice was a melodic hum, carrying a groggy edge. She sat up slowly, her movements fluid and unhurried despite her drowsiness. The blanket slid off her shoulders, revealing the elegant lines of her frame. Nathan's heart skipped a beat as she turned her gaze fully on him. He scrambled to pick up the mug, his hands fumbling in his haste. "Sorry," he mumbled, his voice barely steady. "Didn't mean to wake you." Zara tilted her head, her large, cat-like pupils narrowing slightly. "You often apologize, human," she said, her tone soft yet tinged with amusement. "But your heart beats loud enough to betray you. Are you distressed?" Nathan felt his face flush, heat rising to his cheeks. "No, no," he stammered, waving off her concern. "Just tired. Go back to sleep." But Zara didn't lie back down. Instead, she rose from the bed with the kind of grace that seemed almost unnatural. Her long, bare feet made no sound against the cold metal floor as she approached him. Nathan found himself holding his breath, his pulse quickening despite himself. She was taller than him by at least a head, her presence both commanding and strangely comforting. The silken robe she wore clung to her form, its opalescent sheen shifting colors with every movement, catching the dim light in a way that made her seem otherworldly. "Your mind is restless," she said, stepping closer. The faint scent of her, a mix of ozone and crushed flowers, reached him, making his throat tighten. "Is this about your research?" Nathan swallowed hard, forcing himself to look back at his screen. "I guess," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. She crouched beside him, her proximity filling his senses, her presence overwhelming in a way he couldn't quite articulate. Her fingers, cool and elegant, brushed against his as she picked up the fallen mug. The contact sent a ripple of heat through his body, and he quickly pulled his hand back, trying to regain his composure. "I feel bothered when you work late," Zara observed, her tone thoughtful. "I have observed this pattern. Is it common among your kind to sacrifice rest for intellectual pursuits?" "Sometimes," Nathan admitted, his voice a little strained. Deadlines don't care if you're tired. Zara studied him intently, her glowing eyes unblinking. Fascinating, she murmured. You humans prioritize tasks over your well-being. It's admirable, in a way. Nathan gave a nervous laugh, trying to shake off the growing tension. I wouldn't call it admirable, he said. More like bad habits. Zara leaned closer, her face now just inches from his. Nathan's breath caught as her gaze searched his expression, uncomfortably perceptive. Her glowing eyes seemed to see more than what was on the surface, delving into thoughts and feelings he wasn't ready to share. I sense something else troubling you, she said softly. Nathan tried to meet her gaze, but he found himself distracted by the delicate patterns etched into her skin. Like veins of light, they ran along her collarbone and up her neck, pulsing faintly in time with her breath. It's nothing, really, he mumbled, turning away in a futile attempt to escape her scrutiny. But Zara didn't retreat. Instead, her fingers lightly traced the edge of his jaw, guiding his face back toward hers. The touch sent a shiver down his spine, her hand cool and achingly tender against his skin. You are lying, she murmured, her voice low and resonant. The air between them grew heavy, charged with an intensity that made Nathan's pulse quicken. Her gaze flicked down to his lips and then back up to his eyes, her expression unreadable yet compelling. Zara, Nathan began, his voice trembling with the weight of the moment. This isn't. Yes, she prompted, her voice barely above a whisper. Her breath was warm against his cheek, sending a thrill through him that he couldn't suppress. Before he could finish, her lips brushed against his, tentative, curious, and impossibly soft. The world seemed to stop. Nathan's senses were consumed by the contact, the faint electric charge that seemed to hum through her skin. He froze, his mind racing, trying to process the impossibility of what was happening. But Zara didn't stop. She deepened the kiss, her movements exploratory, as if trying to decipher some unspoken language between them. Her hands cupped his face, her touch sending sparks through his nerves. His body responded instinctively, despite the turmoil in his mind. He pulled back abruptly, his breathing ragged. Zara, he said, his voice hoarse, is this? Her expression was unreadable, her glowing eyes wide with something between wonder and determination. I felt it, she said, her voice trembling. A resonance. Is this, mating? Is this how humans express their bond? Nathan's heart pounded in his chest, his thoughts a whirlwind of confusion and longing. It's complicated, he managed, struggling to find the right words. Zara tilted her head, her iridescent hair shifting to a deeper shade of violet, a color he had come to associate with curiosity. Explain it to me, she said. Nathan ran a hand through his hair, his thoughts tangled. It's not just about physical contact, he said, his voice strained. It's emotional. You can't just. But I felt something, Zara interrupted, her tone soft but insistent. A resonance. It is difficult to ignore. Nathan stared at her, torn between his feelings and his better judgment. Her proximity, her scent, her touch, it all clouded his mind, making it hard to think clearly. Zara, he said again, his voice barely above a whisper, this isn't a good idea. She studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, with a soft sigh, she stepped back. Perhaps I misunderstood, she said quietly. But I will not forget this moment. She turned and walked back to her bed, her movements as graceful as ever. Nathan watched her, his chest tight and his mind racing. She lay down, her hair shifting to a soft blue, a color he had come to associate with contemplation. Nathan exhaled shakily, running a hand over his face. He didn't know what had just happened, but one thing was certain, nothing would be the same after tonight. The sun rose slowly, painting the small apartment in a soft palette of gold and lavender hues. Ira stood by the window, her bioluminescence dimmed in the daylight. Her tall, slender figure was still and composed, but within her, thoughts churned relentlessly. The events of the previous night played on repeat in her mind, the charged emotions, the tentative touches, and the silent exchange of something profound yet undefined. She watched the bustling city below with a calm expression, her sharp, angular features serene, but her glowing eyes betrayed the turbulence within. Beside her, Sam moved around the kitchenette, preparing coffee in a manner that was both deliberate and cautious. The faint clatter of cups and the low hum of the coffee machine filled the air, a stark contrast to the tension hanging between them. He avoided looking at Ira directly, unsure of how to address the intimacy they had shared hours before. He wanted to speak, to say anything, but every potential word felt clumsy, inadequate for the weight of what had transpired. Instead, he focused on the mundane act of brewing coffee, hoping that grounding himself in routine would bring clarity. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee wafted through the room, cutting through the morning stillness. Sam hesitated, then glanced at Ira. Her gaze was distant, fixed on the sprawling cityscape outside, the faint hum of her bioluminescent veins barely perceptible now in the daylight. Despite her apparent calmness, there was an unreadable expression on her face, a mix of curiosity, longing, and something deeper that Sam couldn't place. "Do you want some coffee?" he asked, his voice cutting through the quiet. Ira turned her head toward him, her glowing silver eyes locking onto his. Her bioluminescence flickered faintly, a subtle response to his question. "Coffee?" she repeated, tilting her head slightly in that curious way she often did when encountering something foreign. Sam offered a small, self-conscious smile. "It's a human thing," he explained, holding up the steaming mug. "It helps us wake up. Gives us energy." She approached him with her usual fluid grace, her bare feet silent against the floor. "Rhythms don't require stimulants," she said, her tone thoughtful. "Our energy is drawn from light and nutrients." "But," she paused, glancing at the mug in his hand. "I would like to try it." Sam handed her the mug, their fingers brushing briefly during the exchange. Even that slight contact sent a jolt of awareness through him. Ira cradled the mug in her slender hands, the contrast between her pale blue skin and the dark ceramic striking. She brought it to her lips and sipped cautiously. Her reaction was immediate. Her nose wrinkled, and her bioluminescence flickered erratically, the glowing veins beneath her skin pulsing in a pattern Sam was beginning to associate with discomfort. "This is bitter," she said, setting the mug down carefully on the counter. Her lips pressed into a tight line as though trying to compose herself after the unpleasant experience. Sam chuckled, the sound breaking the tension. "It's an acquired taste," he admitted. "Most people add sugar or cream to make it sweeter." She tilted her head again, her gaze lingering on the dark liquid as though it held some elusive secret. "Humans and their complex preferences," she mused. "Your species is full of contradictions." Sam leaned against the counter, folding his arms. "What do you mean?" he asked, curious despite the awkwardness lingering between them. Ira's gaze shifted back to the window, her expression contemplative. "Your species thrives on connection, yet you often isolate yourselves. You create extraordinary technologies yet struggle with simple harmony. Even now, I am learning things about myself through you that my kind has never taught me." Her voice was soft, carrying a weight of introspection. "It's unsettling." Sam felt a pang of sympathy at her words. He couldn't imagine what it must be like to have one's carefully structured understanding of the world, and oneself, appended so thoroughly. "I can't imagine how that must feel," he said gently. "But if there's anything I can do to help." "You already are," Ira interrupted, her voice quiet but firm. She turned to face him fully, her glowing eyes searching his. "Last night, your presence, your touch, it anchored me." The vulnerability in her tone sent a shiver through Sam. He stepped closer, hesitating only slightly, as though afraid of breaking the fragile connection between them. "Ira," he began, his voice steadied despite the storm of emotions within him, "I don't want you to feel like you have to navigate this alone." Her lips curved into a faint smile, a rare and striking expression on her usually composed face. "You have a way of making the unknown seem less daunting," she said softly. For a moment, silence enveloped them again, but this time it was different. It wasn't the heavy, uncertain silence of before. Instead, it felt warm, almost comforting, as if the air between them had shifted. Ira's bioluminescence pulsed gently, in sync with the steady rhythm of her breath. Sam reached out instinctively, his hand brushing against hers. Her fingers were cool and smooth, and she didn't pull away. Instead, she turned her hand to entwine her fingers with his, her touch deliberate yet tentative. "It's strange," she murmured. "This connection, it defies logic." "Sometimes," Sam said, his voice low, "things don't need to make sense. They just are." She tilted her head, her glowing eyes narrowing slightly in thought. "Humans are curious creatures," she said, a faint note of amusement in her tone. "You embrace chaos so easily." "Not easily," Sam corrected, smiling faintly. "We just learn to live with it." Ira considered his words, her gaze thoughtful. Her bioluminescent veins flared briefly before settling into a steady glow. "Perhaps there is wisdom in that," she said. "Even in the chaos, there is beauty." Sam's breath hitched at her words, the sincerity in her voice catching him off guard. He squeezed her hand gently, feeling the warmth of her presence seep into him. "Ira," he said softly, "whatever this is, whatever we are, I want to figure it out. Together." Her glowing eyes softened, and for the first time, the tension seemed to leave her entirely. She nodded, a simple but profound gesture. "Together," she echoed, her voice a whisper. They stood there in the quiet morning light, the city below awakening to another day. Yet for Sam and Ira, it felt as though time had slowed, the moments stretching infinitely between them. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever questions remained unanswered, they would face them as one. And in that shared understanding, the unknown felt a little less daunting. The stillness in the room was electric, the air charged with possibilities neither Sam nor Ira could fully articulate. They stayed close, foreheads pressed together, sharing a silence that held more weight than words ever could. The dim light of the apartment was softened further by the faint glow of Ira's bioluminescence, her patterns shifting subtly across her skin as though echoing her emotions. Sam's breath hitched as he let the moment stretch, every fiber of his being attuned to the connection between them. He had never felt anything like this before, so raw, so unspoken, yet undeniably real. He drew in a shaky breath, his pulse pounding against his ribs. Every instinct told him to tread carefully, to respect the uncharted territory they were navigating. But when he glanced into Ira's luminous eyes, glowing with an intensity that seemed to reach into his very soul, he couldn't look away. She radiated a quiet resolve that belied the vulnerability of the moment, her gaze steady yet curious, as if she were still piecing together the emotions surging between them. "You're sure about this?" he asked softly, his thumb brushing the edge of her cheekbone. He couldn't help the tremor in his voice, he wanted to be certain, to ensure she felt safe with every step they took. Ira's bioluminescence flickered in a subtle rhythm, a pattern Sam was beginning to recognize as resolve. "Rithans are not accustomed to doubt," she replied, her voice calm yet tinged with a rawness that betrayed her usual composure. "But with you, I am learning to embrace it, this uncertainty, this connection." Her words stirred something deep within him, and he leaned in closer, his breath mingling with hers in the small space between them. Tentatively, Ira lifted her hand, her slender fingers brushing the side of his face. The touch was featherlight, yet it sent a ripple of sensation through him, the kind that left his skin tingling and his heart racing. He closed his eyes briefly, allowing himself to savor the unfamiliar coolness of her touch. When he opened them again, Ira was studying him intently, her expression soft yet inquisitive. "You still seem uncertain," she observed, her bioluminescence pulsing faintly in response to her emotions. "I'm not uncertain about you," Sam said quickly, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. He hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor for a moment before meeting hers again. "I'm just trying to do this, right?" Ira tilted her head, her glowing eyes narrowing slightly in curiosity. "What does right mean to you?" she asked, her tone gentle but probing. Sam struggled for a moment, searching for the right words. "It means respecting what you're feeling," he said finally. "Making sure you're comfortable with every step we take. This is new territory for both of us, and I don't want to rush into." "Sam," Ira interrupted, her voice carrying a rare hint of amusement. "Perhaps it is time to let your instincts guide you." Her words emboldened him, and he couldn't suppress a small smile as he leaned in, closing the distance between them. "Instincts, huh?" he murmured, his voice low and teasing. "I can work with that." Their first kiss was tentative, a gentle meeting of two worlds that had spent so long apart. Ira's lips were cool and impossibly soft against his, her bioluminescence flaring briefly at the contact. The glow rippled across her skin like waves, casting intricate patterns of light that danced across the walls of the apartment. Sam felt her tremble slightly, and he pulled back just enough to search her gaze for any sign of hesitation. But instead of uncertainty, he found curiosity, her luminous eyes shining with a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. "This is pleasant," Ira murmured, her voice soft and thoughtful. Her glowing veins flickered faintly, responding to the emotions she was still learning to name. "But also strange." Sam chuckled, resting his forehead against hers. "Strange can be good," he said, his voice warm with reassurance. Encouraged by his words, Ira closed the distance again, this time with more certainty. Her fingers traced the line of his jaw, her touch light and deliberate, as though she were committing the contours of his face to memory. Sam responded in kind, his hand settling gently on her waist. The fabric of her tunic was thin and smooth beneath his fingers, offering little resistance to his touch. As their kiss deepened, Ira's bioluminescence pulsed in rhythm with her racing heartbeat, the shifting patterns of light illuminating the room in soft, radiant hues. The sensation was unlike anything Sam had ever experienced, intense yet tender, alien yet achingly familiar. He marveled at how their differences seemed to complement each other, creating a harmony that defied logic. He felt her fingers thread through his hair, the movement hesitant but growing bolder with each passing second. Her bioluminescent glow seemed to intensify, as if her emotions were spilling out in waves of light. When they finally parted, both were breathless, their faces flushed from the shared intensity. Ira's glowing eyes searched his, her expression a mixture of wonder and uncertainty. "Is this what it means to be close to someone?" she asked quietly, her voice tinged with awe. Sam nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "It's a part of it," he said gently. "But it's more than just the physical connection. It's about letting someone in, letting them see every part of you, even the parts you're afraid to show." Ira's expression softened, her glowing veins pulsing faintly as she considered his words. "You believe I could experience this," she said, her tone more a statement than a question. "I think you already are," Sam replied, his fingers brushing hers once more. The warmth of his touch seemed to embolden her, and she leaned in again, her movements more deliberate this time. Their lips met once more, the kiss deepening as they allowed themselves to be fully present in the moment. The world outside seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them suspended in a shared space that felt both fragile and infinite. Ira's bioluminescence flared brighter with every passing second, the patterns of light on her skin growing more intricate, almost like a language she couldn't yet translate. Sam felt his own emotions rising to meet hers, a swirl of longing, wonder, and something that felt dangerously close to hope. When they finally pulled apart, Ira rested her forehead against his, her glowing eyes half closed. "This is unfamiliar," she admitted, her voice a soft whisper. "But it feels right." Sam smiled, his thumb brushing the edge of her jaw. "Sometimes, the best things are the ones we don't expect." They stayed like that for a while, their breaths mingling in the quiet intimacy of the moment. The glow of Ira's bioluminescence gradually softened, matching the calm that had settled between them. For the first time, Sam felt as though the divide between their worlds wasn't insurmountable, that, somehow, they were finding a way to meet in the middle. As the evening wore on, the apartment grew dimmer, the soft light of the city outside casting long shadows across the room. Sam and Ira remained close, their hands entwined as they talked in hushed tones about everything and nothing. It was a quiet kind of closeness, the kind that didn't need to be defined or explained. It simply was. Sam and Ira stood together on a secluded hill that overlooked the sprawling city. The sky was a canvas of warm hues, streaked with gold and crimson as the sun dipped toward the horizon. The first stars peeked through the tapestry of twilight, casting a faint shimmer over the world. A soft breeze rustled through the trees, carrying with it the distant hum of life below. It was a scene that seemed to capture the gravity of the moment unfolding between them, a perfect blend of beauty and uncertainty. In Ira's hand rested a small, sleek communication device, its surface glowing faintly in the fading light. Her glowing fingers hovered over the controls, trembling ever so slightly as she weighed the decision before her. This device was her tether to the Raven fleet, a lifeline to the world she had always known. With a single press, she could signal them, and they would come for her, ready to retrieve her and take her back to the life she had left behind. The decision seemed so simple, yet it carried a weight that pressed heavily on her chest. Sam stood beside her, his expression carefully measured, though his heart ached at the thought of what she might choose. He wanted to support her, to tell her that whatever she decided, he would understand, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he let his actions speak. He stepped closer, his presence a steadying force, and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. The warmth of his touch was grounding, a quiet reminder that whatever happened, she wasn't alone. "If I send this signal," Ira began, her voice quiet but laced with tension, "they will come for me. They will expect me to return to my people, to fulfill the mission I was assigned." Sam's gaze softened as he studied her face, illuminated faintly by the glow of her bioluminescence. He could see the conflict in her luminous eyes, the tug-of-war between duty and desire. "And if you don't?" he asked gently, his voice barely above a whisper. Ira's hand faltered, her gaze drifting to the horizon. The city stretched out before them, its lights twinkling like stars, a reflection of the vast and vibrant world she had come to know. "If I don't," she said slowly, her words heavy with meaning, "it will be seen as a betrayal of my duty. My people value loyalty above all else. To stay here, with you, would mean severing ties with them, possibly forever." The finality of her words hung in the air, and Sam felt his chest tighten. He knew this was more than just a choice about where to live. It was a decision that could alter the course of her life, and his, forever. He took a deep breath, willing himself to remain calm. "Ira," he said softly, his hands moving to rest on her arms. "You've already shown them something they never expected. You've proven that a connection between two completely different worlds is possible. Maybe, just maybe, that's enough to plant a seed for change, even if you're not there to see it through." Ira turned to face him fully, her glowing features etched with resolve. His words resonated with her, though they didn't entirely ease her inner turmoil. "You have a way of reframing even the most difficult decisions," she said, her voice tinged with both admiration and frustration. "It is infuriating, and yet, it is also comforting." Sam smiled, a small, encouraging curve of his lips. He reached up to brush a strand of her luminous hair behind her ear, the gesture tender and grounding. "That's what I'm here for," he said simply. She held his gaze for a long moment, her bioluminescence flickering softly as she considered his words. Finally, with a deep breath, she looked down at the device in her hand. It was a symbol of everything she had been raised to value: duty, loyalty, and tradition. Yet, as she stood there with Sam, the weight of those expectations felt less like a calling and more like a cage. Ira closed her glowing fingers around the device, the decision solidifying within her. Instead of activating it, she let her hand fall to her side. Slowly, deliberately, she released the device, allowing it to drop to the ground. It landed softly on the grass, its faint glow fading as it settled into the earth. "I choose us," she said, her voice steady and unwavering. The words hung in the air, a declaration that carried with it both the gravity of sacrifice and the hope of something greater. "Whatever the future holds, I wish to face it with you." Sam felt a surge of emotion rise within him, relief, joy, and something deeper that he couldn't quite name. He pulled her into a tight embrace, his arms wrapping around her as if to shield her from the weight of the world. "You won't regret this, Ira," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We'll make it work. Together." As the sun sank below the horizon, casting the world in shades of deep blue and purple, the two of them stood united. Their silhouettes blended into the growing darkness, their connection a beacon of light in an uncertain world. In that moment, the divide between their worlds felt smaller than ever, and the possibilities ahead felt boundless. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions and adjustments. Ira began to settle into her new life on Earth, embracing the chaos and beauty of a world so different from her own. She and Sam navigated the challenges together, learning not only about each other but also about themselves. For Ira, the transition was both liberating and disorienting. The Wraithen teachings that had once defined her existence seemed distant and hollow in the face of the vibrant, messy, and deeply human experience she was now a part of. For Sam, having Ira in his life was like discovering a new dimension of existence. Her perspective challenged him to see the world through fresh eyes, to question assumptions he had never thought to question. Together, they found a rhythm, a balance between their differences that felt both natural and extraordinary. One evening, as they sat together on the couch, Ira spoke of her people. "I wonder if they'll ever understand what I've found here," she said, her voice tinged with both longing and acceptance. "The Wraithen way values efficiency, order, and logic, but perhaps there is room for something more." Sam took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. "Maybe one day they'll see things differently," he said. "And maybe you'll be the reason why." Her bioluminescence pulsed softly, a sign of gratitude and hope. "Perhaps," she said, leaning her head against his shoulder. "But for now, I am content to focus on the present, on us." As the weeks turned into months, their bond deepened, and their connection grew stronger with each passing day. Ira began to see herself not as an outsider but as a part of something larger, something that transcended the boundaries of species and culture. And Sam, in turn, found himself becoming more attuned to the beauty of the unknown, embracing the journey with an open heart. In the end, it wasn't the differences between them that defined their relationship, but the ways in which those differences came together to create something wholly unique. Together, they stood as a testament to the power of connection, a reminder that even in the face of uncertainty, love and understanding could bridge even the widest of divides. Their story was just beginning, and as they looked toward the future, they knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. As days turned into weeks, Ira began to explore the human world with an insatiable curiosity. The mundane elements of life that Sam had taken for granted became moments of wonder in her eyes. She marveled at the simple act of walking through a bustling market, the cacophony of vendors and customers creating a symphony she likened to a heartbeat of humanity. Colors, textures, and smells overwhelmed her senses, yet she found it exhilarating. Sam found himself seeing his own world anew through her reactions. Every moment with Ira felt like an opportunity to rediscover the beauty in the ordinary, and her joy was infectious. One evening, as they strolled through the city under a canopy of stars, Ira paused before a street performer playing a violin. The haunting melody seemed to hold her spellbound, her bioluminescence flickering in rhythm with the music. Sam watched her with quiet awe, noting the way she closed her eyes, letting the sound wash over her. "Music," she said softly, her voice carrying a tinge of reverence, "is like a language I was never taught but somehow understand. Do all humans carry such beauty within them?" Sam chuckled, his arm brushing against hers. I think we all do, in our own way. But sometimes, it takes someone like you to remind us it's there. Their nights were often spent in deep conversation, exploring not just the differences between their worlds but the shared emotions that made them feel closer than either had imagined possible. Ira opened up about her upbringing, the rigid expectations of her people, and the absence of individuality in Wraithen society. We are not taught to dream, she admitted one night, her voice heavy with a mix of sadness and wonder. Yet here, with you, I feel as though I am discovering the parts of myself I was never allowed to know existed. Sam, moved by her honesty, took her hand in his. Dreams are what make us human, or, in your case, what make us more than human. Keep dreaming, Ira. The world is better for it. As her connection to Earth deepened, Ira began to leave subtle traces of her presence in Sam's world. She helped him see solutions to problems with a perspective that defied conventional thinking. Together, they planted a small garden on his balcony, its growth guided by her knowledge of alien ecosystems and his patience with trial and error. The result was a vibrant blend of earthly blooms and glowing Wraithen flora, a living testament to the harmony they were forging. It became their sanctuary, a place where they could sit in silence or dream aloud about a future neither of them could fully predict but both longed to create. One day, as they walked along the city's outskirts, Ira stopped to gaze at a towering tree, its gnarled branches silhouetted against the evening sky. Do you think, she asked thoughtfully, that bonds like ours could ever inspire others to look beyond their differences? Perhaps even my people. Sam tilted his head, considering her words. If they could see what I see in you, he said sincerely, I think they'd have no choice but to believe it's possible. She turned to him, her luminous eyes glistening with emotion. Then perhaps, Sam, this bond we've created is more than just for us. Perhaps it's the start of something greater, a bridge between two worlds, built not with technology, but with trust.